Welcome to you. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. We seek to meet you wherever you are on your journey and invite you to be part of this congregation in which we draw wisdom from all of the world's religions, balanced with the insights of modern science. We seek to build a diverse, beloved community within our virtual walls and hope to inspire and accompany one another as we act for peace and justice in our larger world. My first grown-up job, salaried job, post-college, was as a tech trainer. I have no idea how many frequent flyer miles I earned that first year, but it was something close to 100,000. And over that time, I learned a lot about traveling, which is not surprising, but I had never actually flown before I took that job. But here's what I learned. I learned always know where your tickets are, stick with carry-on luggage, and if you have the choice, avoid all connecting flights. Words to travel by. I suppose I was a nervous flyer, especially at first. I had no idea what I was doing. Let's just say I was one of those passengers that listened very intently to the safety briefings that the stewards gave before you lift off. Very intently. And I felt it was with good reason. With so many flights, it's not surprising that some went awry. Several flights we landed with only one engine functional. Well, I had many flights unexpectedly divert to random airports. Some had to land almost immediately after takeoff, which I guess is a good thing. One trip, we had to change planes 3 times before we found one that was mechanically sound. I've flown through some heavy thunderstorms. One trip, the altitude dropped so suddenly the masks popped out of the ceiling. Some flights were so choppy it felt like we were in a blender. One landing was hard enough to bring the bags out of the overhead compartments. I probably should swap some notes with Tracy at this point to see if I've got all of the possible outcomes. But I can honestly say that of the several thousand hours I've spent back then and through to till today off of the ground, I have never, not once, seen something out on the wing of the plane trying to rip the engine out. On October 11th, 1963, this is what might or might not have happened to the young pre-Star Trek William Shatner on an iconic episode of the original TV series, The Twilight Zone. That show, created by Unitarian Rod Serling, only lasted 5 seasons. But those 5 seasons permanently changed our relationship to the unsettling and the odd. By twisting society just so, each episode, Serling explored our fears about racism, identity, capital punishment, censorship, the Holocaust, ageism, power dynamics, sexism, social conformity, and of course, fear itself. It was way ahead of its time. The show got a brief revival in 1983 with Twilight Zone, the movie. Anybody see this? Don't feel bad if you missed it. Oof. But while the movie was not, let's just say not awesome, I think it was Rotten Tomato fans, anybody? Rotten Tomato, you should check this out. It's a way to judge movies. This one got like a 50 something. So forgiven if you've missed it, but you did miss also Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks traveling along a Country Road late at night, where Dan Aykroyd turns to Brooks and says, "Want to see something really scary?" before turning into a monster and pouncing on him. You also missed the great John Lithgow, reprising William Shatner's role in the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet episode. And that was complete with the monster out on the wing. Finally, on the ground, Lithgow was then driven off in the movie's final scene in an ambulance driven by Dan Aykroyd, who once again turns to the camera and says, "Want to see something really scary?" And we do, don't we? At least some of us. We live for the rush, like Pavlov's dogs. We get to the point where it doesn't take much to get the juices flowing. We pull into Six Flags. The flashlights come out around the campfire. The quiet as the movie theater darkens. An image of a doorway, right? You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You are moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the twilight zone. It still gives me chills when I hear it. This would be an excellent time in our service to do our thing. So I'm going to ask the tech team to bring our remote guests back into the sanctuary. And we're going to ask you at home to go ahead and turn your cameras on. Maybe even move that into gallery mode so you can see, and we can see you out there. Hello, everybody. Now, in the spirit of our friend, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III of Trinity Church here in Chicago, I want you, online and in person, to choose a neighbor. Any neighbor. Just turn to that neighbor right now. You should be familiar with this. This all is what we do every week. Turn to your neighbor and say, repeat after me, neighbor, oh neighbor. We are more than our fear. Excellent. Well done. Thank you. Amen. Another question for you. Anybody here like haunted houses? I think some in our youth group may be rethinking their enthusiasm after yesterday's trip, and some of them may be doing something else. Even if they've had the bejesus scared out of them, when you ask them, "Oh, no, it wasn't that scary. In fact, it was pretty cheesy," right? It was pretty cheesy. It was totally tame. But you should totally go, right? In fact, I'll go with you. We'll do it together. It'll be fun. Because apparently all parents were born yesterday. Kids get freaked out and their first reaction is, "Oh yeah, let's go scare the crap out of dad. That'll be hilarious." As you probably know by now, movies and TV are kind of my thing, right? But I have to confess, I have never been a fan of horror movies. Jason and Crystal Lake. I mean, I know these names, right? Jason and Crystal Lake, Freddy Krueger and Elm Street, Mike Myers at Haddonfield, Illinois. Just not my cup of tea. Don't get me wrong, right? I was totally there for The Shining. I'm a Stephen King fan. And that John Carpenter remake of The Thing, that was pretty awesome. But the 1999 The Blair Witch Project, or worse, the 2007 Paranormal Activity, I was flat out lied to. And I'm still upset about it. To this day, I don't camp, and we're never going to talk about Paranormal Activity ever again. 10 years ago, I took my nephew to see the movie A Cabin in the Woods. It's a horror movie. maybe one of the only horror movies I've ever seen in the theater. As you can see, I survived, at least as far as you know. Anyway, I remember the movie rather vividly. It was smart and funny and kind of great. It was. Sure, there were lots of monsters, jump scares, and gore, but what I remember now is laughing with my nephew, coming out of that theater feeling like we had done a thing. Ever felt that way after a good scare? Anybody? Like you felt like you had done a thing with somebody? Turns out there's a reason for that. The way it works is like this. When we're scared, the body dumps epinephrine into our bloodstream. Our breathing then speeds up, grabbing more oxygen, and our heart rate increases, feeding that oxygenated blood to our muscles. That is fight or flight. Now, when the moment passes, when the terror lifts, right, the body attempts to calm down. And maybe it even overreacts, but it dumps noradrenaline into our blood. And that's when we get this big gust of peace and relaxation and giddiness. Because that's the fun part. These are the same mechanisms on the one hand that produce laughter, and on the other, also produce human bonding. Same mechanisms. Now you know why your company's next team building exercise will be bungee jumping. Have a great time. Now, maybe it's not as weird as it sounds, really. Fear may be helpful. Fear, especially in controlled doses, at least, that is when we have at least a reasonable expectation of surviving this trip, like a roller coaster or a Halloween haunted house. These kinds of experiences offer us a way to safely blow out our emotional circuit breakers. We can go to a scary movie knowing in advance that it's going to end. We know that we're going to probably have nightmares. And maybe the next couple of decades we will be spending leaping into the bed from the middle of the room, and then lie frozen in the center of the bed until the sun comes up. Yeah, we may know all of that going in, but we know, at least subliminally, that we're going to be okay. That it is really very unlikely that we're going to be dragged out of bed by an invisible demon while we're sleeping. Why on earth did I see that movie? Anyway, we can know all of these things going in. And even if we're terrified, even if the experience terrifies, it turns out that when we come out a little stronger, a bit more resilient. And that is pretty interesting. It turns out that scary experiences like these can be like allergy shots. We build up a tolerance through exposure. I suppose it would be wise to ask, a tolerance to what exactly, Reverend Scott? And this is when I tell my ushers to lock the doors because the zombies are coming to try and get us. I'm just kidding. Or am I? Seriously, the point is, real life can be really scary. A couple of weeks ago, I told you about a college professor of mine who told me that writing stories about werewolves was, quote, cheap because, quote, real life is scarier than stories, especially horror stories. He was, as we discussed a few weeks ago, deliberately missing the point about the value of science fiction when he said that because he was a snob. And everyone agrees it was terrifically ironic when he was eaten by werewolves. But I digress. The point, scaring ourselves silly and doing that together may well be adaptive, evolutionarily adaptive. Horror, scaring each other, terrorizing each other, These can and do teach. We can watch the zombie apocalypse unfold on the big screen and learn thereby that we don't have to be an Olympic sprinter to survive. We just need to be faster than that guy. And that's a valuable life lesson. Sure, I'm kidding, but not really. Studies show that response times are much faster for those who have built up these tolerances. It's not that such folks are no longer scared. Tests show that they are. They're just not frozen in terror for as long as the rest of us. And this may be one of the subconscious reasons we've been scaring each other all down through the millennia. All those campfire stories, all those monster stories, all those times Tracy jumps out and shouts, "Boo!" All of these experiences create adrenaline junkies. And those adrenaline junkies are just not as likely to get eaten by scientifically reanimated dinosaurs housed at tragically misguided theme parks off the coast of South America. Science, it's all science, see? Scaring ourselves may be adaptive. Not all the time, you deviants, but in doses. Slow, anxiety-building beginnings, followed by some fiery crescendo and a definitive end. Kind of like how we want to view the Trump administration. I'm tempted to make a lot of qualifications at this point. Scaring ourselves and thinking of that as wholesome activity is different than daring each other to go take a swim off of Cape Cod with all those great white sharks are swimming out there. Or refusing to evacuate from a coming wildfire or hurricane, or not getting vaccinated during a pandemic, or refusing to vote in the next election, or really any of the next elections. Because unlike watching the movie Jaws, going for a swim with actual sharks doesn't just feel life-threatening, it is life-threatening. Not evacuating, not getting vaccinated, not voting, those are life-threatening. And threatening our lives is not really what we're going for here. My worry is that too many of us today are unable to see the difference. After so much pressure with the pandemic and the last several years of national politics, and all of the anxiety and isolation that comes with a Zuckerberg social media world, with all that, our circuit breakers are just blown. Everything feels existentially overwhelming for so many of us. We're raw, numb, worn down. After years of feasting on a communal and continual diet of low-grade fear, what we need is maybe something of a reset at this point, a way to step back and remember that fear is something human beings face and not something we run from. This past spring, we learned a bit of some of these skills from Kern Beer, the author of the Difficult Conversations Project. Kern taught us a bit about how to step back from our fight or flight reflexes, how prioritizing human connection to others helps us overcome our dumbest lizard brain reflexes. How through practice and exposure, we can become, and remember that we can become more than our fear, because we are more than our fear. We are more than our fear. This was a great class, and if you missed it, I'm happy to tell you that it's actually coming back in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that. I can't recommend this class highly enough. More of us in the world need this kind of training. Because this morning, I want to suggest that we don't have to go to the twilight zone to learn these lessons, to learn to want to change. We, as intelligent, adaptive human beings, as haunted stardust, as children of God, as beings hoping to trace out our lives on the arc of history from nothingness to transcendence, perhaps we ought to look at some of our recent collective public societal experiences as if we all had just had a good scare. I want to suggest that we now, as family, friends, neighbors, communities, regions, nations, maybe even a species, that we stop, look around, shiver, and share a nervous laugh. That was a close one, wasn't it? Maybe we can joke about all the silly faces we made, how that other one was so scared, and then let the noradrenaline hit us. Feel that boost, the increase in our tolerance, the increase in our confidence, the boost of mutual bonding that we all made it together. The sense that we now know something about the world that we may not have before. And with all that, we, the people, might then choose our next act differently. That more and more of us might choose our next words, our next steps, our next projects, our next wars differently. Maybe start a war on inequality, a war on poverty, a war on disease and disability, a war on pollution and corruption and misinformation, a race maybe, a race to find new energy solutions, a race to find ways to green the earth, a race upward to explore our corner of the Milky Way and beyond. And with each challenge, each threatening and life-altering and scary challenge, once met, once wrestled with, once overcome, we can let it invite us to look around in gratitude and wonder and no little surprise that we made it, that we did it together. We should shiver and laugh and celebrate, and then find more ways to bring more of us into the next project, to always widen the circle, each victory creating more tolerance, more resilience, and perhaps most importantly, more appetite for the next one. May we all become drunk on the adrenaline rush of human progress. My friends, we are more than our fear, but that doesn't mean we can't use it. So with that spirit, my hope is that we all find time to pause this Halloween, that we find time, maybe grab a friend, maybe more than one, pop some popcorn, settle in. And when someone asks, "Want to see something really scary?" we turn and throw all that popcorn right at their stupid head before we then press play. Happy Halloween. Amen, and blessed be. And as we prepare to leave this place, continue your journey in love. Care for one another and care for this, our earth. Do justice and make peace. And as you go, know that whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place of hope, joy, love, peace, nervous laughter, basic human connection, that goes with you out into the world. We are more than our fear, and we are different for having spent this time together. So remember, live boldly and with thanksgiving.